Drawer hardware is expensive, like even the cheap stuff, so I built cabinets without buying any of it. No slides, no handles, and that decision saved me over $1,000. In this video, I'll show you how to turn that same idea into a complete workshop system. Base cabinets and drawers, free integrated handles, simple upper cabinets that are clean and easy to build, a tall wardrobe style cabinet with adjustable shelves, and how to perfectly mount a miter saw right in the middle of it all. And instead of getting ripped off at Home Depot, I'll show you how I find the best quality plywood for half the price at the big box stores. All this is easy to build and affordable, and it's customizable to adapt to your workshop needs. The game plan. This is the spot where the cabinets will go, and this is the design my friend Steve and I came up with. My requirements were simple. 1. No drawer slides and no physical handles. B. Include a tall wardrobe style cabinet as well as a place to store a miter saw. Roman numeral 3. It's got to look good and be easy to build. P.S. I want to make a hardware store for all my fasteners using some $6 storage bins. And lastly, this is the big one, they need to be affordable. I priced out several hardware options and they range from $1,700 down to $1,000 for the cheapest ones that I was okay with. So here's the challenge for this build. I'm going to try to build all these cabinets for less than the price of drawer and door hardware alone. It'll be tight, but I think I might be able to pull it off. I hate cliches, but they're cliches for a reason. And if there's one thing I hate more than a cliche, it's when a YouTuber says, "This tool is a game changer," with that one face and an arrow. I think I just threw up in my mouth. In 2019, I had a friend named Robert, and we were both Makita guys. But one day, I'm at a shop and he shows me this new tool he got, the Makita track saw. I'd never seen one in person, and he tells me it gives him perfectly straight, splinter-free cuts with dust collection. He had me at perfectly straight cuts because I hate using a circular saw. A week later, I had a big project using expensive walnut plywood. Yes, walnut plywood is a thing, and it's beautiful. I couldn't afford to mess up the cuts, so I borrowed Robert's track saw. I was expecting to wrestle with that project all afternoon, but in 15 minutes, all my parts were cut, and they were perfect, like beautiful and painless, like a Jerry Jones contract negotiation with a defensive superstar. Okay, bad example. So I did what any good friend does when they borrow a tool. I kept using it for other projects, hoping he'd maybe forget that I had it. But Robert, cruel man, absolute monster, eventually asked for it back. So I tripped and accidentally bought one. And I apologize for what I'm about to say, but it actually was a game changer for me. Most of the time, I believe it's the skill of the person, not the tool, that makes the work. But that track saw, it actually made me a better woodworker. My parts were cut perfect, it was fast, and it made me enjoy the process more. And that, children, is how Drew started collecting track saws. Soon after, I discovered the collapsible cutting table called a centipede, which my 40-year-old back is very thankful for. I eventually learned that throwing some thick pink insulation boards on there is a nice trick too. But my favorite little trick that I learned along the way is using what's called parallel guides. They're the blue aluminum bars you've been seeing me use in this footage. It took me a while to figure out what they do and why people use them, but basically they let you make repeated parallel cuts, hence the name, parallel guides. So if you're building a bunch of panels the same width, you set the guide once, and without marking or measuring, you can safely, quickly, and accurately cut every piece to the exact same size, which makes your process go way faster than normal. It's like having a table saw fence in your hands for your track saw. And here's the thing, you can get great results with almost any track saw brand out there. Having a quality blade is really more important than the brand of saw you have. Now, some brands can be a bit of a fuss, but when it comes to plywood, most of the track saws that I have, they do just fine. I've done several videos reviewing different track saws, and last fall, I even did a big roundup of most of the cordless ones. I'll link to it below the like button if you want to check that out and learn more about what I would recommend. But here's my take. My favorite all time is the Milwaukee. Makita's great too, obviously. I use the Festool most often these days, mainly because it triggers my vacuum wirelessly and automatically, which the Milwaukee doesn't do. And that's super convenient for me when I'm filming and juggling a lot of things on my mind at once. So I end up using the German one that everyone loves to hate. But if you're just getting started, you don't need to spend a lot of money to get one of the best ones out there. If you're doing plywood stuff, The cheapest one I'd recommend is one of the Win track saws, which are basically $100-ish. They're not fantastic, but they're fine, and they work with common guide rail profiles and aftermarket accessories like the Lute from TSO that I love. So much of woodworking really just comes down to making the same basic shapes over and over again. Now you can complicate it if you want, but I usually don't. I'm not sure where pocket screws got a bad rap, but when it comes to building cabinets, I almost exclusively use them. They're fast, they're strong, they're pretty cheap, and they're invisible. Now the one thing that I don't love about pocket screws is actually putting the pieces together. I don't know if I'm doing it wrong, I probably am, but the joint always seems to shift just a little when I drive the screws home, and it's annoying. So I cheat. I use clamps and I use a mallet. To stand the sides up, I reach for these old school wooden screw style clamps. And then once things are mostly in place, I tighten down with bar clamps. You don't need expensive parallel clamps to do this. The cheap aluminum ones work just fine. I've done that for a long time. And then I use this wooden mallet that I made to finesse everything just right. The coolest thing about this cabinet design, especially for lower cabinets, is that you don't actually need that much material. This cabinet uses 2 solid side panels and then 5 3-inch stretchers. That's it. Now, if you're making uppers or something that needs more structure, you'll obviously want solid top and bottom panels. But for a base cabinet that's going under a counter, using stretchers for the top and the bottom and the back is the way to go. Now here's where the system gets really clever. The whole idea is to stick it to the expensive drawer hardware manufacturers. Instead of buying slides, I just do a little math and I make wooden runners that attach to the inside of the cabinet. Then I cut an oversized drawer bottom that rides directly on those runners. I first saw this design idea in an old woodworking magazine probably back in 2010, and so many people have come up with their versions of it. Back then, the example I saw was cutting dados into the side panels for the runners, and I tried that once, but I didn't like it because I felt that it weakened the panel, and those panels usually turned into a potato chip because I'd taken so much material out of one side. And sure, it flattened back up once you screwed everything together, but I found that this method is faster, easier, and it's just as strong, and it doesn't cost a whole lot more, and plywood usually can make this out of scraps. And honestly, it kind of gives people that, oh, that's clever moment when they see how it works, because you don't need a dado, blade, or bit to do any of this work. My design partner and I built digital plans for this 2 years ago, and one of the coolest things is getting emails from people around the world who've built basically the exact same cabinets that I have in their shops. And even cooler are the photos where people take the design and then they make it their own. So if you want to build cabinets like these for yourself and skip the headache, the math, the guesswork, I've got a full set of plans on my website or on YouTube. There's a little product icon below this video. You can click on it. And not only if you do that, do you get a system that will upgrade your shop, but you're also engaging in the #1 way that this channel stays alive, which is making solutions and products for the everyday hobbyist woodworker. So if you've ever bought something from me, 1, thank you, and 2, you're the reason that I can keep making high quality videos like this and post them on YouTube. Back in 2012, I bought my very first pocket hole jig. To be honest, it confused me so much that I had to call a friend, ask them to read it, understand it, and then show it to me, which is kind of funny because now I can use these in my sleep, but for whatever reason, the way my brain works, I have to see things to understand them. I can't just read about it. To be fair, I had never really paid attention to pocket screws or the angles or anything like that, so it was definitely new to me. Fast forward all these years, and last year I picked up this powered pocket machine called the Foreman. It's basically an automatic pocket hole machine. Surprisingly affordable, just a few hundred more than a standard pocket hole jig. And if you are building a lot of cabinets or face frames or trim and you're gonna do a lot of this thing is worth every penny and then some because it saves on your time. You can do perfect pocket holes in a fraction of the time that a typical jig would allow you. Now, not all of my lower cabinets are going to have drawers. I want to show an option for a door. So if you're going to make cabinets like that, you will need solid bottom panels instead of stretchers. And like a blind squirrel that occasionally finds a nut, I stumbled on this little trick. I used squeeze clamps to hold the bottom panel in place while I was assembling. Made things way easier. And of course, add in a obligatory cliche quote here about how a woodworker can never have too many clamps. What you're seeing me build here is a cabinet I've always wanted in my shop, but I've never actually built before. It's a full height wardrobe style cabinet that I'm calling my Narnia cabinet. One of the problems I've run into over and over again in my shop is finding space for big items and also at the same time having storage that's adjustable. So I'm starting with the basics. I'm using a very cheap shelf pin jig from Craig to punch a clean row of holes down each side. They're going to give me adjustable shelving wherever I want it, whenever I need it. And I've used very expensive ways of doing this same task in the past, and to be honest, I don't love it. After fussing with those expensive versions, I ended up driving my happy butt to Lowe's and I bought 2 of these so I could link them together and just do a longer run at once using my drill, and it's been fine for me. And in a move that can only be described as a juke to make you keep guessing, I put down one of the cheapest cabinet tools I have to grab one of the most expensive. I used the domino joiner to cut mortises for a fixed shelf in the middle of the cabinet. Since the cabinet is so tall, I was worried about things skewing or bowing, so I added this shelf in the middle permanently to give the whole thing some stability and to keep it from racking. Now, you don't need a domino to do this step. You could pocket screw it in. That's what I've done in the past, but I really don't like doing that because it's hard for me to keep that shelf from slipping around, and it just bothers my perfectionism. The easiest way is just to glue and brad nail or screw from the sides, which is totally fine. But I've always wanted to try the domino in this setting. I've seen it done before, but my hands and my mind have never executed that operation, so it felt like a good opportunity to learn here. And it worked out perfect, almost like I knew what I was doing. Now I had to watch a few YouTube videos from that bourbon insect guy in Sedge, but I figured it out. The top and bottom are solid plywood panels, but in the back, I cheated again. Instead of using a full plywood panel, I just used 3-inch stretchers across the top and bottom. It's faster and cheaper, and once the cabinet's full, no one will ever know, unless of course you tell them, which I just did. Let's talk toe kicks. There are 2 kinds of people in this world. The smart ones, who build a separate toe kick platform for all their cabinets to sit on, nice, level, and square. And then there are the monsters, the ones who grab a jigsaw and notch out a 4-inch square in the front of every cabinet they build. To be fair, I used to be a monster until I stumbled across this no-name beginning woodworker named Mark Spagnolo, who showed the best way is just to build a platform once, get a level, and then set all of your base cabinets right on top. Not sure what Mark's up to these days, but I think he's got a future in teaching woodworking. Maybe Powermatic will throw him a sponsorship someday. So with my monster ways behind me, I channeled my inner whisper and I laid out the world's easiest toe kicks. Of course, only after cleaning up my temporary work area and after breaking down my portable miter station, which ironically I used to build my real miter station. I figured this job would take 15 minutes and I'd fly through it with no problem. And then this happened. This is why I like building toe kicks like this. I cut all these the same, but for whatever reason, the wood on this one worked, as you can see. However, because I have a solid platform and this one is perfect, all I have to do is put a clamp on this and it meets up perfectly and we'll be good to go. Except it wasn't perfect and we weren't good to go. This version of Drew, right here on the screen, doesn't know yet, but he caused a slight problem with the alignment when he forced that cabinet square with the clamp. So I spent the next 20 minutes in blissful ignorance, soaking up the joy of finally seeing all this hard work come together, and then that sinking feeling came. Have you ever worked on something, thought you were cruising, only to find out at the very end that you made a mistake at the very beginning? Yeah, that's fun. All right, this cabinet's making me really mad. I messed something up, I don't know what it is, but it is skewed, and I'm not sure if you can see, but there's like a huge, almost 3/16 of a gap right here. So I've unscrewed it. My friend suggested to take this clamp and apply pressure here, hopefully bringing it down. So we'll see if it works. Oh, baby, it works. Honestly, I thought I was gonna have to rip everything out, but the little clamping trick actually worked and everything was in alignment and turned out fine. Last year, I built what I affectionately call my Sustainer Museum using these SysAZ drawers from Daddy Festool. Now, I know not everyone loves Sustainers and they kind of violate the whole first order of retrievability theology, but I like them. They're uniform, they stack neatly, and they make me feel like my shop's a little more organized than it actually is. And here's the cool part about building a quality cabinets like this. If you ever need to move, you can literally unscrew them from the garage, move them into your new shop, and it's like reaping the rewards of your labor twice. Pretty awesome. One of the things I didn't love about my last drawer cabinet design was that you still had to buy hardware, and the hardware I chose back then was a royal pain to install. This time I wanted something better, free, good looking, and easy to execute. And it turns out it's not that complicated. There are a ton of integrated cutout designs out there, but I kept coming back to two. One was simple with a subtle radius, and the other had a 45-degree angle at the end. Now I liked them both, but I was completely 50-50 and torn. So I pulled out the Shaper Origin to see them in real life. I designed both options in Shaper Studio, sent them to the Origin, and cut them from scrap the same size as my finished drawer fronts. And it was super easy. After seeing them side by side, I was leaning towards one design, but I asked Instagram for their opinion. Most people picked the 45-degree version, conveniently the one I liked the least. So I did the only honorable thing. I ignored everyone's advice and went with the one that I liked the most. I hate when someone asks for my opinion and then ignores it and does the opposite, but now I kind of get it. Next, I wanted a way to speed up all the drawer cutouts, and I have a cool jig idea for that I'll show you in a bit. But for the cabinet doors, that would have been overkill, so I 3D printed a simple template to drop the handle profile exactly where I wanted, since I was only doing a few doors. This is what I love about 3D printing. You can create custom jigs like this on the fly. This one took about 45 minutes to print, maybe cost 10 cents a filament. It even has a center line inscribed to help me center it on my layout lines. With a strip of double-sided tape, I can stick this jig in place, rough cut with a jigsaw, and flush trim with the router. Fast, clean, and honestly, pretty fun. If you've ever built cabinets, you know the pain of finding good plywood that doesn't wreck your budget. Back in the day, I could buy decent paint grade 3/4 inch plywood at Home Depot for $24 a sheet. Today, a lower quality version of that runs $80 to $90. Here are 2 quick tips that help me find better plywood. First, ask other woodworkers where they go. My buddy Robert once showed me some cabinets he made from gorgeous plywood. When he told me the price, about $40 a sheet, I asked, where'd you get that? He told me about a place called Rodis Lumber in San Antonio, which turned out to be less than 1 mile from my house, and I'd never heard of it. They were my go-to supplier when I lived there. Second, if you're new to a town, just Google it. When we moved to the DFW area 2 years ago, I didn't know anyone. So I literally searched plywood company in Fort Worth and found, no joke, the plywood company of Fort Worth. The plywood I get there is less than $40 a sheet and 3 times the quality of the junk at the big box store. So before you pay $90 a sheet to that big corporation, ask around or search online. You might be a mile away from the best deal in town. The chances are the cabinet builders in your city aren't going to Lowe's to buy their stuff. One of my favorite shop hacks when installing doors is using a story stick. I cut a scrap piece of plywood about 1/4 inch shorter from the inside height of my cabinet to allow for a reveal, and then I clamped it in place after transferring the hinge locations from the door with a pencil. Then I 3D printed a small jig that lines up on my center lines so that I can drill pilot holes in the cabinet sides. In just a few minutes, all 4 hinge locations from the tall Narnia door were perfectly transferred to the cabinet. Now the hinge plates themselves allow for a little vertical adjustment, so you don't have to hit perfection with your lines, but with the story stick, I was dead on, which was a pleasant surprise to me. I repeated this process for the lower cabinet doors, which only needed 1 handle at the top, and I installed the same soft close hinges in the same way. And that's when I hit an unexpected snag. How do you stop the door so it closes perfectly flush? There are plenty of fancy solutions, including some magnet ones that I was really wanting to do, but the fastest and cheapest was so simple. I cut a thin scrap piece of plywood, stuck on some double-sided tape, trimmed it to size, and with everything still open, I could close the door exactly flush where I wanted it, and then I pressed the stop into place on one of the stretchers. And honestly, that tape alone is pretty strong, but just in case, off camera, I added a few brad nails for extra insurance. Okay, right now I'm making about 30 drawers, and instead of walking you through the play-by-play, which would be about as exciting as watching an Eric Spenceley video, I'm going to tell you a story I've never told on this channel. When I first got into woodworking back in 2008, I had 0 tools. My friend Peter, who was a seasoned woodworker, invited me to build an Adirondack chair with him. It sounded like a cool way to hang out, and honestly, the idea of making my own chair out of wood felt kind of epic. We invited our buddy John to come along, split the cost of the set of plans, bought a pile of cedar, and we met in Peter's garage shop one Saturday afternoon. That was the first time I've ever been surrounded by real woodworking tools. A table saw, miter saw, sanders. It was intimidating. Peter gave us the usual shop safety talk. Don't mess around, don't be stupid, keep your fingers, etc. And then John disappeared. Said he had to use the bathroom or something. He came back a few minutes later and started helping out until I heard him scream bloody murder at the miter saw. I look over. There was red everywhere. He was clutching his hand and screaming. My heart sank. He'd cut his finger off. After a few moments of shock, I went into crisis mode. I shut down the sander, cleared a path to the truck, and started preparing for an ER run. Exactly how you'd want to spend your Saturday. I noticed that John and Peter didn't have the same sense of urgency that I was feeling. And then John suddenly stopped screaming. And his face changed. And then he started laughing. And then Peter started laughing. Ketchup. It was ketchup. He hadn't cut his finger off. He was pranking me. John still had all his fingers, and I had a finger for him. Now that was the last time John ever set foot in a wood shop. Peter and I finished our chairs without him, which was fine by me. But that day gave me 2 things. 1, a healthy fear of power tools, and B, a new obsession with making things with my hands. About a year later, I decided to build a TV console for our living room. Nothing fancy, just a plywood cabinet for a TV to sit on. I bought the cheapest plywood I could find at Home Depot, a $79 Skil circular saw, and a Swanson straight edge for about $30. I found a pencil and a tape measure, and I thought I was ready. Except I wasn't. I didn't know how to mark a tape measure. I didn't know which side of the line to cut on. My cuts wandered. My panels weren't square. Nothing was parallel. It was awful, frustrating, a waste of time and money. I hated it. But the idea of woodworking hooked me, and so I stuck with it. Back then, my method for making anything that resembled a box was to rough cut panels oversized with my cheap circular saw and then clean them up on a table saw. Except I didn't own a table saw, and I was still traumatized by Ketchup Gate, so I was afraid of them. So I'd load my plywood into the truck and drive 45 minutes to Peter's house so that Peter could cut it for me. I wouldn't even touch his saw. I'd stand far away, covering my ears, squinting and flinching while he ripped my panels. Now looking back now, it feels like another life. Watching this footage of me breaking down plywood today, using quality tools I never thought I'd be able to afford or have, and especially a saw stop that's literally incapable of cutting hot dogs, I can't believe there was a time, not too long ago, that I would drive across town just to have somebody else run plywood through their saw for me. It's so easy to watch woodworking videos, scroll social media, and think, man, I'll never be that good, or I could never afford a tool like that. Or, wow, that shop is big, must be nice. Or some version of that. And I get it. I do it. You do it. We all do it. And maybe some of those things are true, but maybe they're not. There's a quote that I love. Don't compare your beginning to someone else's middle. And I think that's a very wise disposition to have when watching woodworking videos on YouTube. It'll keep you out of that place of envy and jealousy. And I tell you all of this so that when you see me ripping down plywood with nice tools today, just know that 1, it wasn't always like this. And 2, you don't need the best of the best to make quality projects. I mean, it is nice, but it's not necessary. I started on a garage floor with a $79 circular saw and a whole lot of mistakes. And honestly, that's still where the best stories begin. My wife and I just celebrated 20 years of marriage last week, and we're beyond blessed. And I still remember the early days of being married when we had a cheap, crappy apartment and we'd eat pizza on the floor while we watched television on a small 17-inch TV that she got for free in high school. We didn't have any furniture or anything to our name. That's where the best stories begin. So, wherever you're starting from, whether you've got one rusty circular saw or a shop full of tools and an unlimited budget, the important thing is to be grateful for where you're at, what you have, and just start making without any of those excuses. Today, I've got a saw stop that's scared of hot dogs, but back then, I was the one scared of everything. And if a ketchup prank and a crooked TV console can turn into a whole woodworking career, content business, and tool manufacturing business, then maybe, just maybe, you, my friend, are closer to building your dreams than you actually think. All right, back to the present. Earlier, you saw me using the Shaper Origin to cut the handle profile right at the edge of this scrap using the Shaper tape. And I'm still new to Origin, and so this was the perfect stress-free project for me to get a quick win under my belt. The Origin is a template making machine, and I'm just beginning to unlock the possibilities of what I can do with this thing. For these drawers, I'm using 1/2-inch material, which is about as thin as you go, and it's not my favorite, but it gets the job done. Each drawer gets the integrated handle cutout, but the pocket screws will be hidden behind a 3/4-inch false front that spans the full width. So technically, I'm making 2 fronts per drawer, the 1/2-inch structural front and the 3/4-inch false front. Now, people of the last 2 years have always asked if these drawers are too heavy without ball bearing slides. And the answer is no, because I keep them intentionally shallow. The shallow drawer height discourages me from overloading them with tons of stuff that I would need to dig through and weigh the drawer down. When I do need to store taller items, I just add a taller false front, but the base of the drawer always stays the same shallow depth. That way the drawers look tall where I need them to, but the guts never tempt me to dump in a mountain of junk. Making 30 drawers took only a few hours, and that includes all the extra time moving the camera around for you. Once the false fronts are on, since I only rough cut those, I simply use the final profile of the 1/2-inch false front as the pattern and run the flush trim bearing on it. With that, the 3/4-inch false fronts are perfectly cut to match. If you want to take this a step further, you can add a light chamfer on the inside edge of the 1/2-inch stretcher before you do any of this and install it, which is a nice touch. It kind of makes it friendlier for your fingers as you reach in and pull. And that, my friends, is how you crank out 30 integrated drawer handles without losing a single finger or bringing ketchup into the shop. I'm not bitter. My main business isn't making YouTube videos. It's actually creating common sense workshop solutions for people like you. And I run that business with Shopify, who I've asked to be the sponsor of today's video. Now, Shopify is an all-in-one toolkit that lets you start and manage a business online or in person without needing to know how to code. And I began producing accessories for track saws and trim routers. I had no idea how to build a store or handle orders. Shopify made it simple to go from an idea to a full-blown shop shipping products all around the world. For years, we've only sold online, but recently that changed. At a local woodworking festival, we sold products in person for the first time using Shopify's tap and chip card reader. All the sales automatically synced with our online inventory, no separate spreadsheets, no headaches, it just worked. Shopify handles the heavy lifting, inventory, payments, marketing tools, even a live view that shows real-time traffic, so I can focus on designing new tools instead of wrestling with tech. If you've got a product idea or a side hustle, start your free trial right now by going to shopify.com/wit or just scan the QR code on screen and launch the business you've been dreaming about. Over the years, I've tried a lot of different shop countertop ideas, from quick and dirty to a little more involved, but making thick counters out of MDF and skinning them with laminate has become my go-to method. The laminate I'm using here is the real deal. Glue won't stick to it, and it holds up to years of abuse, and it's worth every bit of effort. It's not the first time I'm doing this. If you ever need to laminate a large surface together, let me introduce you to a little gadget called a glue hopper. These aren't super common, but it lays down glue with a sponge roller faster than you can say, why didn't I buy this sooner? Just one heads up here, that sponge roller is the part you have to clean constantly, and so it's not one of those use it and then set it away and forget it. If you do that, you ruin the roller. There's a little maintenance, but if you're tackling big panels like I'm doing here, it's absolutely worth it. To clamp up these long MDF slabs, I let my OCD show just a bit here, and I drew a full grid of screws equally spaced because I have issues. Really wasn't sure if I could get clamps to fully compress these panels tight together, so I'm using screws as clamps. I actually like MDF for counters, but I hate the kind of fine sawdust MDF throws when you do light kiss cuts like I'm doing here for the final sizing. My shop helper, who freely admits he's not a woodworking pro, suggested that we hook up the 5 horsepower Oneida dust collector with a 4-inch hose to grab all the dust. And at first, I thought it was a dumb idea and that it wouldn't work, but I was desperate, we gave it a shot, and I was wrong. It gave us some of the coolest jet stream shots I've ever filmed. One popular twist people add to these cabinets is turning them into a miter saw station. We've had a lot of requests to show how to do this, and it's actually pretty simple. You just leave a gap between 2 base cabinets and then build some sort of floating shelf for the saw in between. We added a shallow drawer under the shelf for all the random tools that miter saw seems to collect. And since I was designing this in real time for the plans, I made plenty of mistakes. That top stretcher you're looking at, it shouldn't be flush. It should be inset 3/4 of an inch so the drawer front has something to land against. But since I nailed the overall width perfectly and basically had to hammer the sucker in, I didn't want to rip it out, so I did it the hard way using temporary L brackets, a little persuasion, holding my tongue the right way, and we got there eventually, embarrassing myself along the way. Total hack job, but it worked. And the shallow drawer we made came out great. It's just so cute. I even forgot to chamfer the inside of the drawer pull and ended up doing it the old school way with a file and some sandpaper, like a real woodworker. If you look closely, you'll see the drawer lines up perfectly with all the other drawers to the left. And that wasn't true at first. We had to do some tricky late game math to make it look like we'd planned to do it all along. While I was working on these counters, I found myself thinking about my grandparents. They both passed away whenever I was young, and I don't have many memories of my grandfather, but there is one that stands out, and I don't understand why. When they bought a new to them house, when I was around 8 or 9 years old, he loved the blue Formica countertops that were in the kitchen, which was strange because I thought they were ugly. He wouldn't stop talking about Formica countertops. He used to be a carpenter in New England, and apparently he made Formica countertops for a living in a lot of their remodels. He wouldn't shut up about them. And this was the first time that I'd ever heard the word Formica, and for whatever reason, that memory has stuck with me my entire life. Now fast forward to this build. As I shared progress of the cabinets that I was building on Instagram, a guy messaged me and claimed to be a sales manager for Formica, and he offered to send me some laminate if I needed some. And I thought it had to be a scam, but he persisted and just kept sending me messages. Against my better judgment, I gave him my address, and wouldn't you know it, about a week later, a box from Formica showed up with this stuff. I usually buy it down the street, so it's not really a big deal, but the coolest part of all of this was not getting a free roll of Formica. It was calling my parents and saying, hey, remember how Grandpa used to talk about Formica and how he'd build kitchen counters with that stuff? Well, that company knows who I am and sent me a roll. It felt like a strange full circle moment. The company my grandfather once raved about from his carpenter jobs in New England was now a part of my shop build. Now here's a quick tip. If you ever pour paint or contact cement, fold tape on the can rim into a little V like I'm showing here. It keeps the mess down, the rim clean, and makes resealing easy. For contact cement, I put a coat on each surface, 2 coats on the MDF because it's ridiculously thirsty, and then just 1 coat on the back of the laminate. When it's dry to the touch, I set the laminate on scrap blocks, and you have to be really careful here. The moment those surfaces touch, they're welded together instantly. I start in the middle, work outwards, and keep the laminate about 1/2 inch oversized so that I can trim it flush. I like to apply the sides first, trim them, and then add the top so it overlays on the edges nicely. And this router bearing gets super hot enough to melt the laminate on the sides. So I run painter's tape along the edges to keep the bit from scorching the surface. Ask me how I know. Along the way, I made a few mistakes, and the biggest one came from using the wrong bit. At first, I grabbed this big flush trim bit. Technically, it's not even a laminate bit, it's just a large straight cutter. And I didn't like the cut I was getting. It was digging into the MDF. So I reached out to a friend who does this stuff, and he told me to ditch it and to pick up a dedicated laminate bit. It's tiny, only about 10 or 12 bucks at Home Depot, and the difference was night and day. Less friction, no unnecessary cutter length, and a cleaner edge. Honestly, this whole section of the build had me the most stressed. With contact cement, if you accidentally let that laminate touch the MDF before you're ready, you're toast, and it's a ton of wasted time and money. People say you can sometimes heat gun it off, but even if you get it loose, it usually tears and you're buying a whole new sheet, maybe even new MDF. This stuff isn't cheap and I did not want to risk that, so we went super slow, used tons of spacer blocks, we were careful, used even pressure, and in the end, it was fine. We had a little bit of contact cement ooze out on the edges, which is probably natural, and to my surprise, isopropyl alcohol in a file cleaned it up immediately. A couple of quick safety notes: ear protection, eye protection, and a mask. You do not want this contact cement dust and laminate chips flying into your eyes or your nose. And I'm thrilled with how all this turned out, except right here. I purposely skipped the painter's tape on this spot to show you what happens when you try to flush trim without it. See that slight burn? That's exactly how you can scorch the edge of your laminate if you're not careful. Lesson learned, and now you don't have to make the same mistake that I did. In my first real shop, I didn't have upper cabinets. I had pegboard and shelves, and I hated it for two reasons. First, you lose a lot of storage with pegboard. Everything is basically one item deep. Second, once I added shelves above the pegboard, I discovered that all of my tools and supplies gathered a layer of sawdust. So even though uppers take up visual space, I've learned to prefer that over flat storage above my counters. These upper cabinets are different than most. The shelves aren't full depth. When shelves are full depth, I end up dumping stuff in the back where it disappears forever, so I make the shelves about half the cabinet depth and then mount special holders or shallow racks on the inside of the doors. That way, I can see almost everything at a glance as soon as I open the cabinet. Earlier in the video, you saw me assembling cabinets with the Pinterest-approved pocket screw method. But for these uppers, I decided to try something different, mostly because I got bored. Normally, I use the domino just to help align boards during a glue up, but the real magic of that tool is its built-in precision for cabinet making. I've actually never used it to build an entire run of cabinets, so I gave myself a challenge. Make every upper cabinet with nothing but the domino and see if it really makes cabinet making foolproof like everyone claims. And yeah, they're right. It was pretty easy. Now, these turned out to be the most square, dialed-in cabinets that I've ever built. And as a bonus, it gave me an opportunity to show off one of the new products we make called the Wit Grip. Now, some people have bought this thinking that it's just a cup holder for the domino. Seriously, I mean, I appreciate the sale, but it's actually a useful tool for cutting mortises in lots of small, narrow parts like this. Saves you a ton of time. Now, these uppers, like the Narnia cabinet, have adjustable shelving. Once again, easy to do with a drill and some spacer blocks. The two tricks you're watching me use here came from actual cabinet makers back in 2017 when I helped them install cabinets in a house that I was building. First, when you're installing an upper cabinet to a tall cabinet, you can nail the alignment perfectly if you clamp a board to the top of the cabinet and install it like this. Second, after you've installed the cabinet, screw a straight scrap piece of plywood or 2x4 to the wall, level, right where the bottom of the uppers will go, referencing the first one. Then you can tell your helper to go take a break because you can now install the rest of the cabinets perfectly by yourself without any help. This temporary shelf holds the cabinets while you fasten them and guarantees everything is level and aligned. See, I'm not always a hack. That's an actual pro tip you've learned from watching a dumb YouTube video. Congratulations. Now, this was the hard part. I don't know why, but there is so much emotional friction I feel internally when it comes to drilling big holes in something that I just made. Most people put the miter saw vacuum directly underneath the saw, but I've got a different plan for that space that you'll see in a moment. So, to zag when everyone zigs, I'm installing my vacuum in the cabinet next door.
Oh, baby.
A while back, I saw a video from Adam Savage about his dream hardware storage system, and it was brilliant. He used these boxes that I've never heard of called the Sortimo T-boxes, and even sold some custom ones that he had made just for him. I loved them. They were way better than the crappy ones from Harbor Freight everyone uses. Then I saw the price tag, $110 each, and I immediately fell in love with the $7 Harbor Freight knockoffs. Are they awesome? No, they're a piece of crap, but they're $7. And while I am a tool snob with plenty of expensive splurges, part of how I afford those splurges is knowing where not to spend my money. Spending $110 on plastic cases for screws is not going to get you more Milwaukee or Festool. I bought some cheap aluminum angle from Home Depot and cut it to length at my brand new miter saw station, which is pretty awesome. The edges were pretty sharp, so I rounded the ends at the disc sander. And in case you didn't know, using regular woodworking tools like a miter saw or a sander on aluminum is okay. Just wear eye protection. You'll notice that the angle slides are off center, and that's because I wanted to stick with the standard cabinet width that I've been using for everything else, which meant that I needed some filler strips to make up the difference. But the Euro door hinges would have interfered, so I shifted all the filler strips to the hinge side for clearance. It bothers my perfectionism, so when I use this cabinet, I just close my right eye so I can't see that it's not visually centered. I know, I have issues. And this part of the video was really hard to install because no matter what I did, I was in the way. So we had to resort with very awkward installation shots like this one. All the upper cabinets got the same integrated door handle you saw earlier, and it was easier to just tape the 3D printed jig to each door, rough cut at the bandsaw, and then flush everything up at my DIY router table. In this shot, I'm making a story stick to transfer the hinge locations from the door to the inside of each cabinet. Once the left and right uppers were installed, I built a shorter middle cabinet to nest perfectly between them while giving me some height clearance above the Capex saw. That cabinet needed a vertical support to act as a positive stop for the doors, but seeing it visually bugged me. So I hit it with some black paint and called it good. Off camera, I added some cheap LED lights that I ordered from Jeffrey Bezos. The lights are awesome, perfect color temperature, and a must for a black counter, but I thought that seeing the lights themselves would be a problem in future videos. So I made a long L trim out of scrap plywood that would easily cover them. And yes, I know, it's jarring to see me wearing anything other than black. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. If you've been paying close attention, you may have noticed that one of the counters in the background isn't skinned with laminate. And that's because I was waiting on a special piece of magnetic tape that I bought on eBay, apparently shipped by rowboat from China. This whole 2-day free shipping era has ruined my patience. The tape is supposed to have alternating magnetic polarity, kind of like the way digital caliper reads at scale, or at least that's what someone told me. For all I know, they were lying, and now I'm spreading magnetic woodworking misinformation. But the idea here was to prototype a new take on a digital miter saw stop block. If it works, I'll have a good video and a future product idea. If it fails and is a waste of time and money, I'll have a great video because this is YouTube after all. And we tracked down a generic digital readout that can read the magnetic tape, and then we 3D printed a custom stop block that it mounts to that can measure exactly how far it is from the blade. The idea here is that you can just move this down to where you want your measurement, lock it down, flip the block, make your cut. Now, most normal people would just make a fence or embed T-Track and drop in a stop block, which is fine. That's what smart people do. But we wanted to experiment a little here and see what we could come up with. The trick is to hide the magnetic tape inside the countertop. It's actually pretty easy. I found a straight bit that was a tad wider than my tape. I routed a groove and installed that tape after I figured out how to cut it. Then we painted on contact cement and skinned the counter with the laminate like we did on the other ones. Instead of T-Track, I cut an integrated dovetail groove using a match fit bit. I love these things. Now, I never take a dovetail bit to full depth on the first pass. I feel like it stresses the router too much, and I'm always afraid of it jumping and messing up. So I started with the track saw to remove some of the waste. and I followed that with a straight bit, and then I finished with the dovetail bit. Probably overkill, but that's how I like to do it. To slide the long dovetail keys into the groove, we needed a larger opening at one end. So we whipped up a 3D printed jig to cut out that pocket using the plunge base on my trim router. And to my surprise, this all actually worked. I honestly thought it wasn't gonna work. Now I'm gonna live with this setup for 6 months to a year to test it out and see what kind of kinks we need to work out. But if there's enough interest, I'd love to redesign this with aluminum and have a crisp, modern, very easy to use LED display. This version looks a little 1990s, and I think we can do better visually, but I'm curious if you think this idea has legs, or is it just some dumb YouTube idea? To be honest, by this point in the build, I was 5 or 6 weeks into building and filming, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. I was ready to move on to my next video, which is going to be crazy, something I've been planning for 2 years, but there was still one cabinet left to build, and to talk myself into building it, I needed a challenge and a way to build some skill to get me excited to do it. So I decided to cut the profile of this cabinet with the Shaper Origin. Now, you've already seen me use the Origin a couple of times in this project. It's a handheld CNC that can do some wild things, and I'm still learning it and getting comfortable using it, but projects like this help me demystify the machine while keeping the risk low as I'm still a beginner. Now sure, you can make a cabinet like this with a straight line and a sander, but this was the perfect low stress, low risk way for me to practice with a new tool. We designed a profile in Shaper Studio and cut it directly into one of the side pieces with the Origin and the Shaper tape. Then I used that side as a template. I traced the curve with a washer, rough cut on the bandsaw, taped the two pieces together with double-sided tape, and flush trimmed them so that the pair was perfectly identical. For the front panel, I used my 3D printed handle template to cut a small notch so I could pull it out, and repeated the same flush trimming steps. When I finally joined the cabinet and glued it up, it was surprisingly satisfying, especially for someone who was mentally checked out and ready to quit. And that's the beauty of floating tenons in a machine that cuts them perfectly. Even with these scrap pieces that had a lot of slight bow from just sitting around, the tenons pulled everything square with just a mallet, some clamps, and glue. Now I'm turning this cabinet into a scrap cart that will live underneath the miter saw station. Because here's my problem, I can't bring myself to throw away scraps. And I also need a place to throw real things away. And this cart will give me both. Now when I went to Home Depot for casters, I was shocked. When did casters get so expensive? Like even the smallest ones were outrageously expensive. So I went to the freight and picked up a set for a fraction of the price. My quick way to attach casters is to screw a few stretcher plates to the bottom of the cart and then drive the caster screws into those. Now plenty of methods work, this is just fast and reliable and what I like to do. The plan is simple. A 5-gallon bucket inside for actual trash, and the rest of the space for offcuts. Now whether they end up back in projects or straight into the fire pit, I haven't decided. But after all these years, I'm genuinely excited to finally have a dedicated rolling scrap cart, and I can tuck it under the miter saw station when I'm not using it. It's the perfect place for it. For the 6 people still watching, let's see if I failed or succeeded in building these cabinets for under $1,500, the amount I would have spent on the big box store ball bearing slides and handles alone. But before I spill the beans on that, the reason why I've gone through all of this effort to build such a sick setup with so much storage is I'm closing down my YouTube channel and I'm going into the custom guitar business. I'm kidding. But my next video is the story of what happens when a woodworker tries to build an electric guitar for the first time from scratch. And I didn't want to take on that type of project with all of my tools laying on the floor in my new shop. So if you include the cost of plywood, MDF, Formica, storage containers, aluminum angle, screws and miscellaneous supplies, rollers, brushes, LED lights, the digital stop block parts, and door hinges, I spent a total of $1,561.50. Now technically, I'm under budget because Formica donated the laminate, thanks Grandpa, but the actual cost of all of these materials was $1,561. Now that's a lot of money, but 20 feet of storage like this is a lot of storage, and I'll get a lot of use out of this for many years to come. Now, if you want any combination of these cabinet designs for your shop, check out the link in the pinned comment or go to whitworks.shop and you can build something similar. See you next time.